Welcome back to Cracking the Cryptic. And what I did yesterday was to have a go at all the other puzzles in the Times. Now, you can see some of them here. Obviously, we know the Times Concise, the Times Quick Cryptic, and the Times Quick and the Times Cryptic. We've taken you through those. We've also tried all the classic Sudokus and indeed the killer Sudokus. So I'm going to pass over those today. The Brain Trainer is not a very interesting puzzle to look at somebody doing, I don't think, and it's not one I actually enjoy really tackling anyway. So it's most of the others now. There's, as you can see, another 9 here, maybe 1 or 2 more. So I started with the Cellblocks puzzle. Now in this, the rules are, as it says here, you divide the grid. Hang on, I should have paused it there. But what you have to do is divide this grid into rectangular or square blocks, containing each block containing one of the numbers in the grid, and that number has to give the number of squares in that rectangle or square. So it's a fairly straightforward puzzle. What you have to do, the main technique, obviously the thing that people are looking at is a big digit first. So 9, clearly, since the size of the square is 7, a 9 has to be a 3 by 3 block. So in this case, it could be either in that area or in that area or in that area. So looking at the numbers and working out where they are isn't necessarily the quickest way to go about things. What you sometimes have to do instead is look at certain blank cells and work out what number they go with. Now down in the bottom right here where my cursor is actually already pointing, this cell here has to be with this 4. It literally can't be with that 10 because it couldn't form a rectangle, and it can't reach up there because the number up there is a 2. So it has to be with that 4, and it has to be a 4 by 1 block down here. The cell above it after that, then we'll see that again can't reach up the 2, so it has to be with the 10, which has to be a 2 by 5 block. So it's often quite a good idea to find a kind of corner or maybe a remote cell and work out where that has to go, and that can get you started quite quickly. So here we go. I've done that 4. Because I can see that 10, yeah, I highlight that next. That proves where the 3 is down there. I can then fairly quickly see that the 4, 2, and 6 have to work to make that bottom left section here fit in, and that's pretty much finished off the puzzle. So nice, very quick one. 33 seconds for that one. Didn't waste much time. Now what we do find wastes time on the Times site is when you go back to the page, or indeed when you call up the puzzle page, for some reason the Times newspaper website flicks you around several of its pages. I presume that that's probably deliberate rather than just poor programming to kind of interest you in other stories, but it's very frustrating if you're actually just trying to navigate the page. Now the code word, I'm going to pause again. So the rules here fairly clearly are that there are codings in the grid for all the letters of the alphabet. There are no clues, but you do know that all the whole grid will be filled with real words. It's probably worth knowing that they don't really go very obscure in the words. They go with words that most people will have generally heard of. Now this can be quite a dull puzzle in the newspaper because you spend quite a lot of time cross-referencing, filling in as many of, what do they give, at the start they've given you M, O and C, so you would normally have to fill in all the O's, M's and C's, but online they've used the technology to fill that in for you, which is very helpful because it immediately gives you some places like OCC there and MOC there, where there really aren't many word options. So this MOC here, I suppose it could be MOX as well as mocker. And there might be 1 or 2 things I haven't thought of there. OCC and 2 different letters, I think, has to be occur. So I certainly go with that straight away. And again, the great thing about the technology is as soon as you fill in one of those letters, the computer fills in all the other letters for you and takes the letter U, say, off this list of possibles. And this makes it a very much quicker puzzle to do when I'm solving on paper. So a cur goes in there, and now I've got R blank, and that's very likely to be rare. Really, the only confirmation I need is that there are a lot of other A's and E's in the grid. And now I can see Jaguar, I can go down and confirm Mocha. This one down, 17 down, blank RA, blank E, had to be trapeze, I think. That's going to be a very useful answer for the setter of a code word because it gets a Z into the grid and he has to use all the letters. So that was very confident. Similarly, across the bottom, expose is fairly obvious because it will use the X. And really, the rest of the grid then proceeds very, very much in a case of just completing any words that are fairly clear and then at the very end using up the last 2 or 3 letters that are listed in the grid bit on the right here. So this speeds up completion of this puzzle. And normally it would take me somewhere between 4 and 5 minutes on paper. But I've only had a go at 1 or 2 of them online. It seems to be much more like a 1-minute puzzle now. So I'm very happy with that. 57 seconds there for that one. So, you know, that is actually going to make me do that puzzle more often because, as I say, on paper it's a bit of a fag. It's kind of an administrative hassle as well as taking time and is less fun solving. So that's not bad. Now we move on to the futoshiki, one of the Japanese pencil puzzles as they're called. And so here you get a grid with a few greater than signs in it. It fills with the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in each row and column, a bit like a Sudoku. And you have to work out the possibilities using the greater than and less than and the one given that they've given you in the grid. So what I do here, I can see a string of 4. So the first one of those has to be 5 or 4. The next one has to be 4 or 3. The next one 3 or 2, and the next one 2 or 1. So that's pretty much certain. And again, there's another string of 4 that I go to next. 4, 5, 3, 2. Now, as I'm going there, I've paused it because I will have realized that in this 4th row, we've now got 2 cells that have to be 4 or 5. So they must be 4 and 5. So this next cell, where I was going to fill 3 or 4 in, can't be 4 because the 4 and 5 are either side of it. So that must be the 3. That'll fix the one above it as a 2 and the one there as a 1. So you have to use a slight combination of possibilities and what the grid is telling you here. So I think I figured out that's got to be a 3, a 2, and a 1. And where do I go next? Probably down the bottom. Oh no, that's quite interesting. Because, again, I've paused it. Because in this middle row I've now got a 1, 2, and the given 5, this cell in the middle has to be 3 or 4. And in this middle column, the bottom cell had to be 3 or 4. So the 4 is gone, and that cell in between them has to be a 5. Which makes the one on the left of it 4. So again, some fairly straightforward progress. Going up the middle column, this cell here has to be a 2 or a 1, and it has to be larger than the cell on the right. So it has to be a 2, and that one is a 1. And pretty much from here, I think it's almost, in this bottom row, the only possibility for a 5 was here, because every other cell was smaller than something else. And then I think from there, the whole grid fills in just a Sudoku style. You work out you eliminate all the various possibilities, and whatever's left has to be the truth. So futoshiki is not always this easy, but you know, a couple of early deductions there, and that's cracked it. So yet again, a puzzle done in just over a minute this time, 1 minute and 22 seconds. And we go back and pause. You know, what I think of doing every time I go back to the main page of the Times is just looking up at the ceiling for 10 seconds while it flicks through all the various places I don't want to be until it eventually finds the place I do. The trouble is, sometimes I'm not patient enough and I click on something while the page is still readjusting itself, and that ends on me clicking the wrong thing, and I think I do this at some point during this video. So now I'm moving on to Cuckoo Row, which is certainly not a puzzle that for me is going to fill all that quickly. Now here, in case you don't know Cuckoo Row, I'll just pause and explain that the rules are that each entry in the grid is made up of different digits between 1 and 9. And that's important, that they have to be different digits. So this 4 up here, which indicates the sum of these two cells here, has to be made up of 1 and 3. It can't be 2 and 2 because they'd be the same. So it has to either be 1, 3 or 3, 1. And you might remember from our Killer Sudoku videos, or you might already know that a 7 has to be made up of 1, 2 and 4 if the numbers are different. 1, 2 and 4 down there, and 1 and 3 across there. So the only common possibility is a 1, which must be the cell in the corner. So then goes the 1, and that's proved the 3. So now, again, you spend your time looking for various possibilities. This 16 that crosses with an 11 here, 16 has to be made up of 9 and 7, and 11 in 3 digits can't have a 9 in because the other two cells would be 1s, and they'd be the same, so that's illegal. So the 7 has to be there, the 9 has to be there, these two cells have to be 1 and 3, just as these have to be 2 and 4. And there are various points in the grid where you do get some help, like where you do get entries crossing where there's only one possibility, but certainly I have to resort to putting in some, that wasn't certain. I have to resort to putting in some of these pencil marks to note what the various possibilities are. And certainly as the solve progresses, I should have surely worked out there was a 9 at the top of that. Oh no, that's not certain actually. 9, 8, 6 makes 23. Okay, fair enough. I was doing better at the time than I'm doing looking at it now. So in go the possibilities, and 33 there down, having done these puzzles for a while, I know that 9, 8, 7 and 6 make 30. That's often useful in a 4-digit place like here. And if 9, 8, 7, 6 make 30, then the lowest possibility for the other cell has to be a 3. So once 16's had a 6 and a 4 put in, and it's in 5 digits, then, and it's crossing with 33, then that has to be a 3. So that's the sort of logic one's using here. The rule of 45 occasionally comes in. This 38 here is 7 cells long, so you know that it's using 7 of the 9 digits between 1 and 9 that would all add up to 45. So the difference between 45 and 7 is 38. So it must be missing one combination of 4 and 3, 2 and 5, or in this case, 1 and 6. And it generally helps to kind of pursue the deductions one has made around the grid until you get stuck, and then maybe find another traction point where there's a start. For some reason in the times, the Cuckoo Rows are often quite symmetrical in nature. So as you see here, there's a 4 at the top crossing with a 7, and down in the symmetrical part of the grid at the bottom right, there's also a 4 crossing with a 7. So that gives you a 1 in the corner if you happen to look down there. And similarly, 23 crossing with 17 matches 23 crossing with 17 there. And I think 16 crossing with 11 as well. So there are some similarities. They tend not to work out exactly the same in symmetry terms, but there are some useful guides there to how to go about it. Now, that doesn't necessarily equip you for dealing with Sudokus Cuckoo Rows that aren't in the times, because they don't necessarily follow those kind of recurring patterns. Another thing that you often see in the times is crossings of a 4-digit. What is the numbers now? 9, 7, 2, 1. So that's 19 and 20 will cross with something where the fact is it's often made up of 9821 and 9721, and you can then work out what that's crossing with. So, sorry, it's not very well explained, but there are some patterns that are fairly regular. Now here, where I've just put in 689, I should have noticed that 16 must be 97, and that's resolved a lot of my possibilities up here straight away. in this 29, if I'm right with what I've put in here, that 8 means that the ones above and below it are 7 and 9, and the one at the top must be the 5. So there are various possibilities. Once you get some of the possibilities in the grid, there are variously different ways of narrowing down what you're actually meant to be doing. If you get really stuck, one of the ways of going about things is to add up all the acrosses in a section and all the downs in the section, work out the difference, and that must be the one cell sitting outside that section. But that's a slightly tedious way to go about things and requires some arithmetic that's quite difficult to do in your head sometimes. So that's kind of only for if you really get stuck and if there is that possible way of going about things. So now I haven't even started in this bottom corner. I think I do at some point realize that that's going to be easier than messing around with the various possibilities that I've got going here. That 7 has to be 1, 2, 4, and that 3 has to be 1 and 2. But this 32 has to have 8 made up from it, apart from 9, 8, 7. And I think the only possible place that a 5 could go, or anything as big as a 5, was down here in the 11. So that's resolved that for me. Now I've finally spotted this symmetrical position with the 1 in the bottom corner. Hopefully I'll see the 7 up here fairly soon as well. And then I should be nearly finished with what I've got coming in from the rest of the grid. Yes, here the 7, 3, 1 was very quickly resolved because I'd got that one already. So that enabled me to finish that off fairly quickly. Now at the top level on the Nikolai sites, I'd say that a Cuckoo Row like this would be done by the expert solvers in probably a minute or maybe a bit less. They just are phenomenally quick at seeing the patterns. I'm obviously not dreadful, but it's not a speciality for me, even though it's a very common puzzle type, and that's taken me 5 minutes and 43 seconds. That's not dreadful. It's hard to tell. I can't remember if the Cuckoo Row had said anywhere whether it was a difficult one or not, but I think that was a relatively straightforward one, and it still takes quite a while because of putting in all the pencil numbers. If I was a little more experienced, well, quite a lot more experienced and better in my head with the numbers, then I could maybe make the deductions a lot quicker and go through that. But actually, in fact, in terms of understanding how to solve the puzzle, my solve there might help. Now, this is where I've hit the wrong. I've gone to some Sudoku here, which was by mistake, so we have to go back again. And if you do that once wrong, then you have to go through this rigmarole of flicking through the pages that you don't want to see again, and that's very tedious, but you do learn patience that way. So this time I've kind of waited a bit before the possible puzzles have come up. Now we've done code word for Toshiki Cuckoo Row. We're on to Ken Ken next, which is another Sudoku type puzzle, quite an interesting one. Little bit more arithmetic here, in that each box, I should pause it while the explanation's up. Can you still see that? You fill in the grid using the digits 1 to 6. Again, every row and column has to have each of the digits 1 to 6. And then there are little boxes with a number, a result of a sum, and an operator in. So the box with 3 and a divide in has to either be filled with 6 and 2 or 3 and 1, because 6 divided by 2 is 3 and 3 divided by 1 is 3. So in this puzzle, let's just pause it and tell you what I'm thinking about. First of all, this 120 times here, that can only be made up of the 3 biggest numbers. 4 times 5 times 6 is 120. That's going to mean that in the rest of this bottom row, you've got 1, 2, and 3. And the only way to make up this box with 2 divide in is 2 and 1. So that's going to put the 3 here by elimination. Similarly, in this first column down here, 15 plus, that also has to be the 3 biggest numbers, 4, 5, and 6. Now, therefore, the bottom 3 in that column are 1, 2, and 3. And if you had a 1 in a 24 times box with 3 numbers, the other 2 numbers would have to be 6 and 4, but that's not possible. So there can't be a 1 in this box. It's not possible because we have 4, 5, 6 going on up here. So these have to be either 1 and 2, 1 and 3, or 2 and 3. And they can't include the 1 because that would leave this impossible. So they must be 2 and 3. And that's what gives me the start on the columns. And as I mentioned, the start on the rows was at the bottom. So I'm kind of working it out here. 4, 5, 6. I'm checking whether it can be a 1. It can't be. That has to be 2 and 3. And they multiply together with 4 to give 24. The 1 in the first column has to be there, so that's fixing some of that. Then I have to find somewhere else to make deductions. Now, this 5 minus in 2 cells is always got to be 6 and 1. And that might help us fix something. But now I've decided to put in the possibles that I know from other things. Now, that was going to be 4, 5, and 6, but it can't include the 6. Whereas the other 2 can. Now at the top row here, I'm just going to pause it again while I talk you through what's going on here. You've got a 3 divide, and as I mentioned at the start, that has to be either 6 and 2 or 3 and 1. But also in the top row, we've got a box with 5 plus, and that has to be either 1 and 4 or 3 and 2. If this 3 divide box was 3 and 1, then there would be no possibility left for the 5 plus box. And that's the way to get started at the top of the grid. So once we know that that's 6 and 2, the 2 down here is telling us which way round they are, that's fixed the 6 in this 4, 5, 6 box. We can put in the 1 and 4, and that helps fix this top left corner as the 5. And now we've got some progress going on throughout. Again, it's an elimination process. We've got a 90 times box here with 3 in the top. One of the things to note about Ken is you can have repeated numbers within a box as long as they're not flouting the rules that the same numbers can't be in the same row and column. And that's a big change from killer Sudoku, where you can't have repeated numbers in a box. So that's certainly worth knowing when you start tackling one of these puzzles. It makes a very big difference. Now, given what we've got, the quickest deduction down this right-hand column, we've got 1, 4, 3, and we've got a 7 plus box. So that has to contain 2, 5, and then the bottom right cell will be a 6, and that helps me finish off here. I think I'm working that out now. That has to be 2, 5. The bottom right cell 6. The rest will finish on basic Sudoku principles. And that's another of these puzzles done in just under 2.5 minutes. So we move on after that to, I can't remember what comes next. I think what would come next is the polygon puzzle, which is a puzzle where you're challenged to make as many words, legal words, as possible out of, it's not that yet, but that's one that I will pass over because I don't think that's going to be a very interesting puzzle to watch being solved, and I don't think it really has a solution in the way that the others do. So now we have two puzzles that are unique, I think, to the times, called Lexica, where you have to fit these given letters into the grid, but the rows or columns that they're given in determine where they have to be to some extent, and the fact that the grid is then filled with words determines the rest of it. Now the way to go about this, sometimes you will get a few cells where there's only one possibility. Like that top left cell, there was a K at the top and then dots that can't go in everywhere else. So the K goes in there, and then you can quite quickly work out the only possible word running from the K is curb. I think very quickly then from that E I worked out the only word that was likely that could go across from the top of that is expert. That fixes where that E goes. To get a T and a V into a word beginning with R, it's going to have to be rivet. And this whole puzzle therefore solved very quickly. I can see behave as a possibility now, and I think the final word on the bottom row is test. So that one went very quickly indeed, less than a minute. Lexica is not always that easy. It often depends whether you get a decent starting point. So the next Lexica puzzle, we'll have a look at that and see if that's any more difficult. Have to, as usual, flick through these pages of the Times. Now, I'm not particularly advertising the Times, but they do some very interesting puzzles here. As you can see I could wish that their website worked a little bit more in a little bit more user-friendly fashion. So we move on to the other lexica puzzle. And I'll just pause it for a second so you can have a think about where you would get started or how you could go about this. Again, there is one giveaway cell straight away, because in the left-hand column we've got only one possible letter for one possible cell. So the G has to go there. But there would be various possible words that go in from that G, I think. Well, maybe not, I don't know, but you're not quite as well constrained by having to put the R and E in this row as one of them could be in the end cell. So we might have to find somewhere else to get a bit of purchase on the puzzle. And let's watch my solve now. The G goes in. I certainly don't complete the word beginning with the G straight away, although obviously I'm confident that this down word will begin with a vowel. And in fact, I'm looking at the V. I don't know. Oh yes, I think the V can't be here because there's no word that I can think of which would allow the R and L to be with it apart from relive, and that there's no I that could be in the fourth cell. So I think the V is there, but then I've focused on the G and A that have to go in the top. And it can't be G, A something, because that would leave an I or an E as the third letter. So it has to be either rag or lag. Now I've had a bit of a pop at each going down the second column. And it turns out that that's wrong, in fact. So although I'm making other deductions about other parts of the grid now, I'm going to have to come back to that and fix it. The rest of the grid's working quite well, and this is looking like it is going together. This word down now has to be retail, but obviously I've used the E, so I'm going to have to move that to fix it in a moment. So in goes chase, that's kind of proving retail. In goes retail finally, and I can just, it turns out, slide the E across from each, and then move the A in each up, and we've got gate and arch to finish off. So a bit slower, partly because of the error there, and that's 1 minute 38. Now, I'm not sure the rest of the puzzles are worth seeing. Let's see what happens in the rest of them. It's not much more for us to do. I mean, the chess and bridge articles aren't puzzles as such. They're articles about chess and bridge, although they do teach you a little something, they're not really individual puzzles, and it's not something I could show you a solution. And we have two more to do, because I'm not going to do the polygon. I'm going to have a go at set square and Sudoku. And the set square is a little grid that uses the numbers from 1 to 9 once each. So does Sudoku actually, but set square does as well. But here, as you can see, there are little sums to do in order. They've certainly finished the first one off for you. 9 times 6 is 54, minus something is 52. And then you just have to work out the various possibilities. Now I'm looking at that 12 going down. To add to 6, I need another 6 made up of two numbers. The 2's already been used, so that's 5 and 1. That's going to mean that this 5 down here has to be made up of 2 times 4 minus 3. The rest just fills in very straightforwardly, and that can be a very easy puzzle, especially if they give you 2 givens to start with, so less than half a minute. And for the remainder of the time on this video, we're just going to look at my solve of the Sudoku. Now, Simon's given some instructional videos on Sudoku, or at least one before, and frankly I should have been paying more attention, because I really struggled with this puzzle. Not just because my PC gave up in the middle, and you'll see a black screen for a second or two, and I've cut out the period where I lost power entirely. But I don't think that actually hindered my time. My time, which was over 3 minutes, was taken because after the first couple of numbers going into the puzzle, I really couldn't work out how to go about the rest of it. And in the end, I thought I'd kind of have a bit of a punt at some possibilities. So you can watch the rest of that and laugh at how I do. Oh, there's the black screen. But anyway, the puzzle comes back. The first couple of numbers are fairly straightforward, from the pink cells subtracted from the 14 and the brown cells subtracted from the 15. And after that, I'm afraid I was struggling a bit more. So the rest of the video will play out, perhaps with the music and my solve of this puzzle, Sudoku. So, you know, the whole general theme is the Times is publishing a lot of quite interesting puzzles. The software to solve them now is very impressive, in my view. You know, they're really very user-friendly, and my hat's off to them for that. I think they're quite entertaining puzzles to do, and I'm not saying the Times subscription is cheap, it's not necessarily, but if you have one, I do recommend these puzzles, as well as, of course, the Sudokus, killer Sudokus, and crosswords. It's a very good puzzle offering from the Times now. Thanks very much for watching, and hope to see you again on Cracking the Cryptic.